I'm Callista.
And I'm Teresa, and this is Terrifyingly Typical True Crime.
We're a true crime podcast that covers a series of common crimes or typical themes in true crime by diving into a related case each week. Rather than covering a different one off case every week, we connect several cases to explore that type of crime or criminal. If you're like us and drawn to true crime because you're curious about the extremes of human behavior and want to understand how someone could commit such atrocious acts, we hope that delving into related cases puts them into perspective. We're continuing with our theme of daughters who kill, but today we're going to talk about a girl who enlisted the help of her boyfriend to kill her mother and sister.
Today we're talking about Britain's youngest double murderers, Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham. When police crashed through the front living room window of the Edwards home at 5 Dawson Avenue in Spalding, Lincolnshire, at noon on April 15, 2016, they discovered 14-year-old Lucas Markham and 14-year-old Kim Edwards lying on a mattress in the living room. An officer asked where her mother Elizabeth was. Kim Edwards said only upstairs. When pressed to account for what had happened to Elizabeth, it was Lucas Markham who answered grimly, "Why don't you go and see?" After officers had done exactly that and found two bodies on the upper level, both Lucas and Kim were arrested. Once she had been cautioned, Kim Edwards pointed to a box of medication and said, "We were going to take them." Lucas, for his part, replied to being cautioned with, "Fuck life."
And I can't think of a much more teenage response than that.
Too true. And you're getting arrested. I mean, fuck life. That seems apt.
Fair enough.
So, just what exactly happened before these murders, and who was the teenage couple who committed them? To answer that, let's go back to the beginning.
No one could claim that Lucas Markham had an easy childhood. Born Stan Lucas Markham on August 1st, 2001, the domestic violence that characterized the end of his parents' relationship saw Lucas placed with numerous foster families. His father's alcohol use disorder resulted in him neglecting his children, and his mother died from cancer when Lucas was around 4 or 5. Shortly after her death, he and his brothers began living with his aunt. However, this stable home could not erase the trauma experienced at an early age, and Lucas and his younger brother would often fight, and his aunt was forced to call both the police and children's services. Lucas would also engage in self harm by cutting and violently headbutting and punching his aunt's doors and walls. Even though there were concerns about Lucas's aggression and violence, his aunt felt less able to manage his younger brother's behavior. In his psychiatric report, Dr. White stated that even though Lucas began living with his aunt while still young, his exposure to alcohol use disorder and domestic violence would have left him in a constant fight or flight response or a fearful state, meaning that he saw small obstacles as life or death problems that caused him to respond disproportionately. Additionally, his amygdala, which is our emotional center, might have been altered and the reason for his difficulty in dealing with his emotions.
Damn, I know he goes on to commit murder, but I sympathize with young Lucas. Sometimes it seems like all the odds are stacked against you.
I know, at this point, I really feel for Lucas.
The lack of a single stable home in the earliest years also resulted in Lucas developing an insecure attachment style, which meant that he had a fear of abandonment and believed that he couldn't rely on others. So when his relationship with Kim began, he experienced, perhaps for one of the first times, the feelings of being both wanted and needed, and he felt the need to protect her. Who then was Kim Edwards? Kim Rose Edwards was born on June 13th, 2001. She grew up with her mother Elizabeth and her younger sister Katie. Similar to Lucas's difficult relationship with his brother, instead of being close to her sister, Kim felt that Elizabeth loved Katie more and resented their relationship. Her mother's close relationship with her younger sister had left Kim feeling depressed and isolated, and she said that she had wanted to kill both Elizabeth and Katie since she was young. Kim felt that Lucas was the first person she had ever met that actually listened to her. She also felt that he wanted to help ease her depression.
Kim said to one psychiatrist about her mother, quote, "I wanted to get revenge for the way she treated me," end quote. Was this only in revenge for her close relationship with Katie? Well, no. Kim stated that her issues with her mother dated back to January 2008, when Elizabeth hit 6-year-old Kim in an argument over the TV. Elizabeth then reported herself to social services, and Kim and Katie spent a few months in care. That same year, the file was closed and the girls went back to living with their mother. But Elizabeth later claimed that she didn't think Kim ever really forgave her, which at this point I can kind of understand. That understanding will evaporate later on, though.
Yeah, I wonder if Elizabeth's self reporting herself to social services was so she could have a break, or was it a cry for help? I mean, it takes a village, and this village is a ghost town.
Given her relationship with Katie, I lean more towards the latter, that Elizabeth wanted to get better so that she could take care of both of her kids. But Kim and Elizabeth's problems came to a head again when, in September 2013, Elizabeth reported to Kim's teachers that Kim had planned to run away. But by March 2014, she went back to them and said they were mending their relationship. However, 8 months later, Kim went to support workers and claimed her mother had attempted to strangle her, but both Elizabeth and Katie said that was a lie. Appropriately, Elizabeth requested family therapy from her GP in January 2015.
Finally,
It does seem like they could all benefit from talking to a therapist at this point.
at the beginning of the same year, Elizabeth found a suicide note that Kim from Kim and made an emergency psychiatric appointment. But the assessment discovered no mental illness, and in August 2015, Lincolnshire's Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services stated that while Kim felt herself not to be a part of the family triangle, her relationship with Elizabeth had improved. But 2 months earlier, in May 2015, Kim had started dating Lucas, and that relationship would only continue along a downward spiral that would culminate in two murders. Kim and Lucas had gone to the same school, and Lucas lived at the other end of her street with his aunt and brothers.
Side note, apart from his younger brother, we couldn't find any information about how many other brothers he had. After learning of her hatred towards Elizabeth and Katie, Lucas went on to also hate them, a feeling that was only exacerbated by Elizabeth's disapproval of their relationship. In the weeks prior to the murders, Elizabeth had even banned Lucas from entering the house. Kim and Lucas would instead meet in the garden, and Elizabeth called the pair a time bomb waiting to go off. This first explosion happened in October 2015, when Kim and Lucas's shared discontent led to the couple running away, only to be found sleeping in the woods to the north of Spalding 6 days later and sent back home. Upon their return, Kim discovered that her mother had removed her possessions from the room she shared with Katie. After being rugby tackled and restrained by his family members, Lucas also found out that his family had taken everything out of his room.
How was this a good decision? Do you think the parents really thought that Kim and Lucas were gone for good? I mean, they were 14, or were they just being spiteful?
I obviously can't say for sure, but I don't know how they could assume that two young teenagers would never be found.
Yeah, honestly, I'm impressed that they slept in the woods for 6 days. Anywho, a clear snapshot of Kim's mental state is the incident that occurred in March 2016, the week that Lucas was moving to another school, having previously been expelled from the one he had attended with Kim. Kim, who described her life at this point as a living, walking hell, took an overdose of painkillers. Even though Lucas shared Kim's preoccupation with suicide, and they would even meet up with another girl to talk about it, Lucas called for help after Kim's overdose.
On April 9th, 2016, Kim and her mother argued, and Elizabeth told Kim she would turn out like her father, who had left them when Kim was 2 years old. Kim, understandably upset, had told Lucas, and on the weekend before the murders, the couple locked themselves in Lucas's room, only leaving later through the window to grab Kim's contraceptives from her own home. When Kim finally went back home, she discovered that Elizabeth had discarded some of her possessions and given others to Katie. With this latest incident, Kim felt that she no longer had a place in the family. So she and Lucas began planning the murders the next day in a McDonald's. Kim had decided that her mother was the main thing wrong with her life, and plotting her death not only felt necessary, but it also excited her.
Kim and Lucas obviously had issues, but giving Kim's possessions to her sister when Elizabeth seems to favor Katie seems like you have just given up on continuing to parent Kim. Parenting is hard, but how the hell did she think this was a good thing to do?
I mean, it's a good point.
Their plan was as follows. They agreed that Lucas would come over to Kim's house on the night of Monday, April 11th, 2016. He would knock 3 times on Kim's bedroom window, which she was still sharing with Katie. This would be her signal to open the window of the nearby bathroom to let him in. Lucas would come prepared with several knives and clothes to change into after the ones he had been wearing were covered in blood. Once inside, Lucas would kill 49-year-old Elizabeth and Kim would kill 13-year-old Katie. So once night had fallen and both Elizabeth and Katie were asleep on April 11th, Lucas left his home and walked for almost 30 minutes along Spalding's Coronation Channel. He then veered into the alley behind Kim's home, climbed a fence, and scaled the single story shed extension at the rear of the house to access Kim's window from its roof.
But even though Lucas had followed his part of the plan, Kim didn't hear him knocking. She had fallen asleep. So Lucas returned home and put the knives back up. Since Lucas wasn't allowed back into the school Kim still attended, they got together after school had let out the next day and agreed to try again that night. Once again, Lucas made the same journey to Kim's house. But once again, Kim had fallen asleep and couldn't let him in. Apparently, her very real thoughts of murder were not keeping her up.
It would be comical if it's not wasn't so horrific, obviously. Would you think most people would be amped up or nervous or chillingly, as she had said, excited?
It seemed like Lucas was also questioning her commitment because the following day, Lucas and Kim again met after school and confirmed they both still wanted to follow through with murdering Elizabeth and Katie and would make another attempt that night.
Lucas traveled the same path once more, but on the third attempt, Kim had managed to stay awake. Upon hearing him tapping at her window, she went into the bathroom, removed everything from the sill to grant him access, opened the window, let Lucas in, and advised him on how to move silently through the house. After he had landed inside, Lucas took off his backpack and began unpacking his supplies. He removed the black t shirt he planned to change into and unwrapped the 4 knives within. Kim picked up one of the knives, tested it out, and chose it as the weapon she would use to kill Katie. But even though they had agreed only moments ago that they were all set upon their murderous course of action, Kim changed her mind at the last minute and told Lucas she couldn't kill Katie. Lucas would have to kill them both. Having decided that both Elizabeth and Katie would have to be stabbed in the larynx to silence their cries, Kim remained in the bathroom while Lucas made his way into her mother's bedroom with a 20 centimeter kitchen knife.
Lucas proceeded to follow their plan to stab Elizabeth in the throat. For part of the attack, he pinned Elizabeth to her bed by climbing on top of her and sitting astride her. As he attacked her, Elizabeth fought back and left scratches on his back, bum, and face. After about 3 minutes of the onslaught, though, she went limp. From the bathroom, Kim heard her mother desperately fighting for her life, followed by the horrific sounds of gurgling as Lucas's knife found its mark. Some reports say that Kim came in while Lucas had a pillow over Elizabeth's face. Others say that she entered the room as he grabbed the knife. Either way, once she made her way into her mother's bedroom, she found that blood splattered the wall, the bed, and the floor. After about 10 minutes of smothering her with a pillow, Lucas checked for a pulse and found none.
Wow, he was determined, getting on top of Elizabeth to make sure he was in the best position to carry out the murder. And then when she was still gurgling, spending another 10 minutes smothering her with a pillow to make sure she was dead.
Yeah, we'll go on to talk about this more later, but I do think Lucas believed he had to do this for Kim, so nothing was going to stop him. After smothering Elizabeth, Lucas climbed off her bed and removed his sneakers, since they were causing the floorboards to creak. Kim asked if he had finished killing her mother. After he had confirmed that he had, Kim asked if she had struggled, and he again said yes. Kim then returned to the bathroom, and Lucas entered Kim and Katie's room.
He found Katie lying on her back, facing away from him. He leaned over and stabbed the knife through her throat. Afterwards, he grabbed a pillow and pushed it down on her face. Lucas claimed that she didn't struggle, but that he noticed her arms twitching. From the position Katie's body was found in, it looked as if she had tried to get away from Lucas, but he had managed to get to her and left the knife he used on top of a chest of drawers in Kim and Katie's room. The sentencing judge, Justice Haddon Cave, said that The killings were brutal in the form of executions, and both victims, particularly Elizabeth Edwards, must have suffered terribly in the last minutes of their lives. Kim, though, was less concerned with her mother and sister's suffering and more preoccupied with the inconvenience of sharing a space with two brutally murdered family members. Not a fan of the smell of her sister's blood, she used a sheet to cover Katie's face.
That certainly wouldn't hide the smell of decomp, but I suppose that would take a bit before it became noticeable. However, in my layperson's opinion, I'm not sure how effective that would have been at masking the smell of blood. I mean, wouldn't it just coat the sheet too? Then it would also smell like blood? The only thing I can think of is that Kim waited until the blood had dried and then covered her sister. But again, would a sheet just lying on top of her really mask that smell?
How could it? Like you said, the blood is going to soak the sheet. If she didn't like the smell of blood, how was she going to handle the smell of decomp? Though that wouldn't be immediate, I'm wondering if there was a smidgen of guilt and she wanted to cover the body so she didn't have to see her.
That was my thought too, because I saw nothing indicating that she covered Elizabeth.
After the murders, Kim and Lucas shared a bath, then changed into blood free clothes. They moved the mattress off Kim's bed, ignoring the body of Katie that still lay within the room, as they grabbed it and maneuvered it down into the living room. During the next 36 hours, Kim and Lucas had sex, ate ice cream, moved alcohol from the shed to the kitchen table, and watched four Twilight films.
At first, I thought that maybe they saw themselves in Bella and Edward, a couple who felt they couldn't live without each other. And this is just my opinion, but I think Lucas saw himself as eliminating the obstacles to the relationship, given how Elizabeth felt about it. Kim, though, and we'll talk more about her feelings after the murders in just a bit, but based on the hatred we've previously mentioned, I think it was more about revenge and less about wanting to be with Lucas. Again, this is just my opinion, but I think Lucas loved Kim more than she loved him, and she used him. But what do you think?
It seems like it. She wanted her mom and sister dead. She felt like the odd one out, felt like her mom didn't love or maybe even like her. Lucas was easily manipulated, and she got him to do what she wanted, even saying at the last minute she couldn't kill Katie. So Lucas had to. I also can't think of a more teen angsty move than eating ice cream, drinking alcohol, having sex, and watching all of the Twilight movies.
It's true.
Even though they mainly stayed in the living room during these 36 hours, the couple still had to go upstairs to use the bathroom, ignoring the two bodies that still remained on that level every time they did so. While their plan had been to kill themselves with a combination of pills and alcohol, they ultimately chose not to because Kim hated the smell of alcohol.
Which makes you wonder if either Lucas had been the only one drinking, or if this was a lie because Kim was fine drinking, she simply decided not to go through with this part of the plan.
Although Kim had gone into detail when plotting her mother and sister's deaths, this same attention to detail and level of commitment was not seen in her decision to kill herself after the murders were committed.
Again, I think this shows that Kim was the one who ultimately made the decisions, and Lucas just went along with them. Not that that excuses him murdering them, obviously.
Obviously, and it doesn't seem like suicide was ever her plan. I don't know what kind of pills they were, but drinking alcohol along with the pills wasn't compulsory unless alcohol poisoning was the goal. She could have just taken the pills.
I did wonder if maybe they didn't have enough pills, so they needed the alcohol too, but it's kind of irrelevant because I also don't believe she ever truly planned to die by suicide. On April 14th, the day before the bodies were discovered, Lucas's aunt reported him missing, and both Kim's and Lucas's schools also reported them missing. That same day, Lucas's aunt came to Kim's house, and on a separate visit, a police officer also visited the Edwards home. Despite Kim and Lucas being inside, neither responded to either visitor.
I wonder how long they thought they could hide.
They're teenagers. I think they planned the murders, and that was it. Given her aversion to the blood, it seems like they didn't consider the bodies or getting away with the crimes. Then, on the morning of the next day, the same police officer visited the home for a second time. And while there was still no response, this time he heard a dog barking from within. After contacting Elizabeth's employer and the school and discovering that no one had heard from either Elizabeth, Katie, or Kim since April 13th, 2 days earlier, police broke into the Edwards home. So we're back to where we started. And I wanted to say that beyond their ages, I could only find limited information about Elizabeth and Katie, such as that Elizabeth attended church and worked as a dinner lady. Being an American, I looked this up, and it's apparently the British equivalent to a lunch lady here in the States. So, a woman who serves meals to children in schools. And Elizabeth's bereaved friend, Jane Blandford, remembered her as funny and lovely.
Let's move on to the autopsies. The pathologist who examined both Elizabeth and Katie found 8 sharp force injuries to Elizabeth's body. 5 of these were to her hands, indicating that she was likely trying to defend herself from Lucas's attack. While these 5 wounds couldn't definitively be classified as stab wounds, presumably they were too shallow, in line with many defensive wounds. The remaining 3 were. Of these, one stab wound was to her right shoulder, and the other 2 were to her neck. The stab wounds located on Elizabeth's neck had injured her internal jugular vein, and one of these stab wounds had almost entirely severed Elizabeth's windpipe. Unsurprisingly, Elizabeth's cause of death was the stab wounds to her neck. Because the wounds had not gone through any bone tissue, the degree of force was ruled to be mild to moderate. So Elizabeth wouldn't have died immediately from them, and it seems that she survived for a short period of time after receiving them, as seen with Lucas smothering her afterwards.
As for Katie's body, she had 2 wounds to her neck. One of these wounds was inflicted from the left side and caused a small defect within the right vertical artery. While this resulted in a moderate amount of bleeding and would have affected the flow of blood to her brain, this alone wouldn't have caused her to die. Due to the pillow found over her face, her lungs were examined, and the pathologist ruled that Katie had died from both smothering and hemorrhaging from the stab wound to her neck. Additionally, one of her vertebrae was injured, which indicated that she had been attacked with severe force. Even though Lucas refused to comment in his first 2 interviews, he went on to give a prepared statement that included his confession to having killed both Elizabeth and Katie. When asked if he was happy that Elizabeth and Katie were dead, he replied that he was and he wasn't. He said that while he was murdering them, he had felt both calm and happy to know he was protecting Kim. He later showed little remorse and seemed disconnected from what he had done. Instead of feeling empathy towards the Edwards family, he felt hostile towards a few of them. However, he also stated that he didn't enjoy bringing about their deaths, but that he and Kim wanted to kill them and he felt it had to be done. Again, this seems more like Kim's the one pushing for this, and Lucas agrees to go along with it for her.
I completely agree. And I'm not saying Elizabeth was mom of the year and treating Kim and Katie differently, grabbing her neck if she actually did that. But it's not like Lucas was, protecting Kim from a sexual or physically abusive parent. But who knows how much Kim embellished the truth to Lucas.
I wouldn't put it past Kim to lie to Lucas about what her mom had actually done.
Yeah, she needed him to kill her. So I don't think lying was off the table.
Definitely not. While on remand in the secure unit, Lucas was verbally aggressive towards the staff. As he struggled to regulate his emotions, he often resorted to verbal abuse and violent threats, especially when an adult criticized him or he felt out of control. His aunt struggled to accept his crimes, as you would. However, Lucas viewed his previously strained relationship with his father as improving after the murders. Lucas was also believed to be at a high risk of being diagnosed with dissocial personality disorder when he reached adulthood.
That's because Lucas could not be formally diagnosed with dissocial personality disorder at the time, since in the UK, a person must be 18 years or older and meet at least 3 of the following criteria. The first 3 of which I think we can reasonably say apply to Lucas: a low tolerance to frustration and becoming enraged or violent at the slightest provocation, inclination to blame others or to rationalize behavior that conflicts with social norms, an incapacity to feel guilt or to benefit from adverse experiences like punishment, a lack of concern for others' feelings, a habitual irresponsibility and disregard for rules and obligations, and an incapacity to maintain lasting relationships. Interestingly, this is different from antisocial personality disorder. He was assessed as posing a high risk of reoffending, committing violence, or doing serious harm to those within the community. Although his early life experiences were not classified as mitigating factors, they influenced his behavior and view of his relationship with Kim. Accordingly, psychiatrist Dr. White did not assess Lucas to have a mental illness.
And what about Kim? After the murders, Kim said she was happy to know her mother was dead and that both she and Katie were killed quickly, but she did regret Katie's death and wished she was still alive.
At least Elizabeth's death wasn't quick, but what is she going to say?
Exactly. She needs to rewrite what happened to make herself feel better. Kim believed her mother had emotionally abused her, but that Katie was young and didn't deserve what happened to her. However, at the time of the murder, she wanted to act out on the resentment and anger she felt towards Katie by bringing about her death. Coming back to what I said earlier about my understanding evaporating, that happened as soon as Kim started planning Elizabeth's and Katie's deaths, as neither her mother nor her sister deserved to die. Lucas's and Kim's childhoods don't excuse their murderous actions.
I completely agree. Lucas had a particularly awful childhood, and Kim's wasn't ideal. But I am in no way absolving shit parents or tough childhoods that kids go through. And a 14-year-old brain is not fully developed enough to know the difference between right and wrong. But there has to be a point when running away or living with another family member, something besides killing two people, is an option.
Like you said, they were old enough to know that murdering Elizabeth and Katie wasn't the right course of action.
Similar to Lucas, Kim had a significant attachment problem with Elizabeth and was emotionally vulnerable. Kim also didn't empathize with her mother and sister, regardless of understanding the trauma they had endured. Unlike Lucas, though, Kim appeared to be enjoying her notoriety and floated the idea of writing a memoir. She not only felt justified in what she had done, but also demonstrated a degree of narcissism.
I mean, I'm not sure how you could not say someone was narcissistic if they felt that they were justified in writing a memoir as a teenager. Unless it's someone like Anne Frank, of course, but I don't really think Kim's life compares.
Yeah, she wanted them dead. She planned their murders, convinced her boyfriend to carry out their murders, and was getting a lot of media attention. She probably thought she was worthy of a book deal.
She definitely thought she was worthy of a book deal. I just don't think anyone else shared that belief. In spite of their unhealthy relationship being one of the primary motivating factors that led to the murders, Kim's attitude towards Lucas shifted while she was held in the secure unit. She claimed that she now saw that he'd been controlling and that she had no remaining affection for him. In reaction to his future sentence, she felt that he hadn't been forced into anything and should face the consequences for what he had done, which is true, but also really feels like her refusing to take responsibility for her actions, but maybe that's just my take.
No, I think a lot of what she says regarding Lucas after he murdered her mom and sister at her direction was crafted by her solicitor. She is rather cold, in my opinion. She uses Lucas. Now that they have both been arrested, she is basically done with him. As we will discuss in more episodes on this theme, it seems rather common for a girlfriend to convince her boyfriend that killing her family members is the only option, and it just kind of kills me. I honestly, I feel bad for Lucas. I feel like he had a shit childhood, and Kim comes along, and I can almost feel like it's like a little radar. Is she like looking in the schoolyard? Oh, look, he looks like somebody that'll be malleable and I can control. Because I mean, she hides in the bathroom and here, go do what I've asked you to do. She's a manipulative little bitch.
Yeah, I do feel that they were both definitely damaged and had some issues, but I really feel that Kim pushed Lucas. Again, that doesn't excuse him murdering her mother and sister, but it really does feel that she was the one behind everything. Whether Lucas feels the same way that his feelings have also shifted hasn't been stated. As for her future sentence, psychologist Dr. Spooner stated that Kim had witnessed and been subjected to domestic violence, and her defense relied on psychiatrist Dr. Chakrabarty's reports to argue for diminished responsibility. These reports stated that Kim had an adjustment disorder because of severe attachment problems. Also, if you're curious like I was, an adjustment disorder results from either a change or a traumatic event and is mainly a diagnosis given to children and teenagers, usually within 3 months of the event. Symptoms of depression, anxiety, and or a concerning change of behavior, such as becoming more reckless or aggressive, will manifest.
So the argument was put forward that Kim's mental illness meant that she could not think rationally or control her actions. However, psychiatrist Dr. Joseph assisted the Crown Prosecution Service in stating that Kim did not have a mental illness and was fully responsible for her actions. Kim was assessed as posing a high risk of serious harm within the community, especially if she was presented with future obstacles. However, she was thought to be at low risk of reoffending.
And maybe this is just me being ignorant, but that feels a little contradictory unless you're saying that she would harm others in a way that did not constitute a criminal offense. But then how is it serious? Nonetheless, Kim's age and the emotional trauma she experienced in childhood and adolescence were seen as mitigating factors. It does seem odd that Lucas's age and trauma wouldn't have also been mitigating factors, but I don't have a law degree, so what do I know?
Yeah, this seems like a lot of legal jargon to confuse rather than to clarify. How can you pose a high risk of serious harm within the community, but then be a low risk of reoffending? Make it make sense. Also, I think that it is a really biased analysis on Kim versus Lucas. How could his age and trauma not be mitigating factors?
It's hard not to see it as biased, although maybe that was because he was the one to physically kill them. But as I've said, I don't know how many times now, I think Kim was the mastermind behind it all. Elizabeth's partner, Katie's and Kim's older half sister, and her father gave victim impact statements that described the nightmare they had been living in since the murders. And flowers were laid on the yard outside the Edwards home to remember Elizabeth and Katie.
On October 10th, 2016, Lucas Markham, now 15, pleaded guilty on rearrangement to 2 counts of murder, and Kim Edwards, nearing 16, admitted 2 counts of manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility. However, this plea was rejected by the jury, and the following trial was concluded on October 18th when she was convicted of both counts of manslaughter. On November 10th, Justice Haddon Cave ordered that both Lucas and Kim should serve a minimum term of 20 years, less 206 days spent on remand. The minimum term would have normally started at 21 years, but Justice Haddon Cave reduced it by 5% because Lucas pleaded guilty to murder and Kim pleaded guilty to manslaughter. The aforementioned trial was only to decide if the psychiatric evidence constituted diminished responsibility. Justin Haddon Cave said the case had few parallels in modern criminal history.
Nonetheless, both appealed their sentences. They had three reasons for this appeal. The first was that their intention to kill should not have been an aggravating factor. The second is that they weren't properly recognized as children. And the third is that Lucas should have gotten more credit for his guilty plea, which was only entered on the morning of the trial because the psychiatric evidence had been delayed. Following this appeal, three judges at the Court of Appeal in London changed the sentence from 20 years to 17 years and 6 months, less time spent on remand before they are eligible for parole. The appeals were allowed on the grounds that Justice Haddon Cave did not account for the fact that Lucas and Kim gave a full admission of fact while only 14, which streamlined legal proceedings and lowered litigation costs.
One more thing to note in the case of Britain's youngest double murderers is that while Kim's and Lucas's names were not released during their 2016 trial at Nottingham Crown Court, the name ban was lifted by Justin Haddon Cave, who stated that, quote, "It is impossible for a public properly to understand this case without knowing the identity of the defendants and that these murders took place in a closed family context. This singular fact informs and colors one's entire understanding of the case. Unless one knows this singular fact, it is impossible to understand the true motives behind these murders," end quote. That is to say that Kim and Lucas killed Elizabeth and Katie because they were Kim's mother and sister.
Okay, everyone, that's where we're going to end today. Next week, we'll be continuing our series on Daughters Who Kill when we discuss the case of Suzanne von Richthofen.
All the sources we used for this episode are in the show notes below. If you'd like to suggest a case or theme for us to discuss, feel free to email us at terrifyinglytypicalpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us at Terrifyingly Typical Podcast on Instagram and at Terrifyingly Typical Pod on TikTok. Leave us a comment below to let us know what you thought of the case. We'd love to hear your opinions.
See you next week.